Today's lesson is on the manual exposure mode, usually noted with an M. Again, you've got four main modes, P, S, A, and M. We've already gone over shutter priority mode, aperture priority mode, and now we're going to go over manual mode. Manual mode you use when you want full control over things. You don't want the camera making decisions for you. Maybe the lighting is really difficult, or maybe the lighting on the subject is constant, but the lighting in the background changes.
In order to use manual mode, first you must put your camera into manual mode. You do this by turning the knob on top to line up with the M. This is exactly the same as you did with aperture priority mode and shutter priority mode. Now that you're in manual mode, your camera will no longer adjust exposure. It's relying on you to tell it what the aperture is and what the shutter speed is. In order to set the shutter speed, turn the knob on the back of your camera. In order to set the aperture, hold down the exposure compensation button, which is the one with the plus and minus symbols, and at the same time spin the knob on the back. Now this is specific for the D60 by Nikon. Your camera is going to be similar. Refer to the manual just to make sure. Shooting digital gives us the ability to get immediate feedback, and we're going to use that to our advantage when we shoot manual. We're really using that to our advantage no matter what mode we're shooting, but right now, as you're learning, it's really important. So just take a photo, and then after the photo's taken, press the playback button, whatever that happens to be on your camera. Don't drop your camera in the process. And then you can immediately see whether or not there's useful information, or whether it's all black, or whether it's all washed out in white. On all modern digital cameras, you can access a histogram. Refer to your manual on how to do this. When you're looking at the histogram, if all of the data is bunched up on the left side, it means you're underexposed. In order to increase the exposure, dial in a smaller aperture number, so a more wide open aperture, or a longer shutter speed. If all the data is bunched up on the right, you're overexposed. In order to correct this, dial in a smaller aperture number, so a smaller aperture, or dial in less exposure time, so a shorter shutter speed. I was originally going to use Paddington Bear to show the difference between using manual exposure in complex situations and allowing the camera to use its matrix metering in complicated situations. However, my little son Tristan decided that he wanted to be part of the show, and so we're going to bring him on to show the differences. I'm taking this first shot with aperture priority mode, and I'm letting the camera just decide. And you see the white background and my son sitting there. And then here in the photo, you can immediately see that the white background is reasonably exposed, but Tristan is in fact underexposed. You can see his face is kind of dark and shadowed. This is not ideal. And now I've set exposure manually, and I'm taking the next shot. And here you can see in the shot, the background is blown out, but the important stuff in the picture, Tristan, is well exposed. And this is one of those situations that your matrix metering can just get confused and you need to override it. I've now put in a black backdrop, and I'm repeating the aperture priority shot. And you can see here it did a much better job than it did with the white backdrop. So obviously of the two backdrops, it's getting confused along the way. And then in this shot, I'm using the exact same manual settings that I did with the white backdrop. And you can see that it's pretty well exposed. Tristan's face looks exactly the same as it did in the manual exposure with the white backdrop. There's no difference at all. So in these cases where matrix metering can get confused, you're better off in manual mode. Use manual mode anytime that you need absolute control over your exposure, or any time that you think that your camera is going to miss the exposure because it's complicated or it's changing constantly.